let me congratulate you on your very important mission. I wish I could be there with you, and I hope you'll be successful in establishing the crimes and wrongful conduct of Israel's assault on Lebanon. This is Ramsey Clark speaking to you from New York. I'll go back to one of my earliest experiences with Israeli and U.S.-sponsored violence against Lebanon. It was 30 years ago, roughly, probably 1976 or 77. The Palestinians were, the PLO were still in office there in Beirut, and I'd come in to do some legal work with them. And we'd gone down to what we call Beaufort Mountain, which is a high mountain, has an old castle on it, and to see, watch the Israelis who were shelling it for sport with extended range artillery, firing from maybe as far away as 18, 20 miles. You could, as we came in from Tyre, on the road, you could see puffs of smoke up on the mountain where this artillery was hitting it. And we went up there and saw where people were dug in, not many, and Israel was having its fun and games. We drove back that night, got away fairly late. It was almost dark when we got back to Tyre. I always think of the description in the Old Testament of Tyre as that place of perfect beauty, which it is. Driving north from Tyre along the seacoast road, we suddenly saw ahead a bunch of flashing lights, and came upon an awful scene where a little van that had 7 religious women with their religious robes on, bleeding and mangled, their van virtually destroyed. And what had happened is some Israeli commandos had come up on the beach, apparently laid down and waited for a vehicle that suited their fancy to come along. And this little van with these women coming north on the highway as we were happened at that time to be going back to a convent or wherever they were headed. And they were all killed. It was really the bloodiest highway scene of that sort that I have encountered. And it showed the random violence. Killing anybody is okay. Just whoever happens to come down the highway at that moment. We were feeling pretty depressed when we got back to Beirut that night. It was Ramadan. We ate dinner about 2 o'clock and then tried to sleep. Edward Said was one of the 3 people with me on that trip, and none of us will ever forget it. You have to decide whether you consider Israel's assaults to be a continuing war of aggression, which it probably is. I think back a couple of years after the events I described, Israel had invaded all the way to the outskirts of Beirut and slaughtered hundreds in refugee camps at Sabra and Shatila. There's never been peace, occupation of the southern strip there for decades, and just slapping Lebanon anytime it wants to. Its military largely coming from the United States, financed by the United States, supported by the United States in the UN and elsewhere. Just take votes like things on the partition walls in Palestine, and You have the General Assembly voting 130 some odd to a handful being little countries loyal to the United States, maybe 5. Israel, the United States, but nobody pays any attention. The aggression in '06 was different, though, and a new status was established, because this time when Israel invaded, it was effectively stopped, effectively outmatched, and it had to look for ways to get out. Its usual arrogance was evident. I mean, even Kofi Annan said that it appeared deliberate, that they had attacked a UN observer mission, killed 4 people. One of the really most unhuman, anti-humanitarian things they did was dump cluster bombs all over the South in the last days. For what reason? To blow the limbs and life off of Lebanese children playing in the areas there along the southern border. How long would it take to clear that up? And what intention could it have had except the deliberate random murder of people walking in a land that ought to be full of peace? This time, though, the tables were turned, and the Israeli army, for all of its armor and firepower, was really stopped in its tracks. Heavy casualties inflicted on its military, as many as Lebanon lost, more maybe. Its air power was unchallenged, unchallengeable, and they took the opportunity to bomb vital facilities as far north as Tripoli and a bridge or two even further north, not much room further north in Lebanon. Deliberate destruction to damage the country and keep it down. But Hezbollah showed that that sort of aggression can be stopped. It can be turned around and sent home. And hopefully the lessons learned, although we have to assume that from their activities that they'll come back with more high-tech materials from the United States and seek again to have their way. There has to be accountability for this. The 1,200 or more human beings who lost their lives, their families, the destruction of property, all up and down, the wanton destruction of property and life, all up and down the country. There has to be accountability for that. And the United States is a sponsor of that terrorism, you might say, to use our legal language, because it makes it possible, doesn't it? My own country has to be held accountable too. Unity will be essential if we're to overcome. Unity in the Middle East among Arab and Muslim and Christian peoples, all the peoples there. But that can't begin until those who use violence to have their way, Israel with all its military power and the United States seeking to dominate a much wider region, the tragedies of Iraq and Afghanistan and the threats beyond, the instability of Pakistan now. But your tribunal can bring out the truth, and hopefully the people will have the courage to act upon the truth, and then the truth will indeed set us free at last. Thanks for your good work, and Godspeed.